This is a full recording of BBC Click's interview with Peter Todd at the Bitcoin Squat in London. It was first broadcast on the 20th of September 2014. This recording was made by me, Chris Ellis, on the second day of filming and was only intended for personal use at the time. Since then, the BBC have released their full edits and the broadcaster has sparked a lot of controversy on social media as we felt that a great deal of complexity in the subject matter had been left out due to BBC Click's show format. After notifying the BBC and with ample public discussion on the World Crypto Network, we decided to release the audio in full so you, the community, can decide on the complex subject matter and the BBC's editorial decision making. There is a transcript in the description below, and please make your voice heard in the comments.
I think within Bitcoin there's a lot of people who want to kind of brush over the fact that from the point of view of someone investigating a crime, it's very easy to use Bitcoin in ways that make it very hard to go trace someone. And people like to get very pedantic and say, Bitcoin's pseudo-anonymous, Bitcoin's anonymous. And, I don't really think that's that interesting of a debate. Bitcoin is not a perfect technology, but no technology is.
When you say perfect, it's not perfectly anonymous then, that's right?
Yes, but then again, nothing is. Any computer system you could imagine, you can always go screw it up and it turns out there's a drone flying by your window or something. Anonymity is always kind of a degree. And I think the important thing is that Bitcoin is orders of magnitude easier to use in ways that are untraceable. If you're, say, someone with not that much money. Of course, the reality is within the finance system, if you do have a lot of money, it's very easy to go set up shell companies, manipulate the system to move money around in essentially untraceable ways. The system wasn't designed per se for that, or maybe it was, but the fact of the matter is you can. And Bitcoin provides the same capability for people of more limited means, which is, we always like to go say Bitcoin levels the playing field.
That's one thing that we're looking at with this document that's reportedly from ISIS with the dark wallet. What are your thoughts on that, with ISIS using the dark wallet potentially as a tool to fund their activities?
I'm sure at some point they would, but on the other hand, we've seen ISIS and Taliban and all these organizations use tons of tools already. The existing financial system is designed in a way that if you have large amounts of resources, you can go use it to your advantage to move money around untraceably. And I suspect, there is certainly political forces that would rather that stay true. And equally, it's always risk and reward. If ISIS goes and uses Bitcoin to go and get some funding, that's a negative. But what does Bitcoin also enable technology? It's the usual thing. We could go put cameras in every bathroom, but it's not worth it.
If you knew directly about an ISIS group using the dark wallet, for example, or Bitcoin, what would you do? Would you do anything to prevent something happening with that money?
Dark wallet software. If I were to go do something to go and encourage the software to be changed to catch them, the fact of the matter is I would be making dark wallet less safe for everyone. There's no intermediary here. You go make things less safe for other people in the same way that if I were a manufacturer of a box, would I go and say, let's just go and make this lock not actually work? Because, we'll be able to bust in criminals' doors easier. Well, sure, but now criminals can bust into other people's doors easier. The way the world works is you're much better off if you give everyone tools to stay secure, and you accept the fact that some criminals are going to use those same tools. But there's not that many criminals out there, and we've dealt with this problem for hundreds of years.
I guess some of the criminals now are becoming very extreme, and we're seeing much more movement towards people who can act almost on the same level as the state. They can develop their own militaries, they can develop, get weapons, and some people might say the dark wallet facilitates.
Well, I don't think that's anything unique. You go back 50 years, did there exist guerrilla movements without anything digital? Well, sure. There's always been criminals of various size and organization. We've dealt with this problem. We know what society's up against, and we know the harm isn't that great. Whereas we know the harm of totalitarian governments is enormous.
But might you say that the harm is similar because some groups like ISIS, for example, oppression of women, is that something that would be useful to fund? Is that something that you
Well,
want to-
again, I think this gets back to the thing of Bitcoin does not change the status quo for well-funded adversaries. They already have access to it. And Bitcoin changes the status quo for not well-funded adversaries and equally not well-funded people who want in society. I mean, Bitcoin as an example, you know, WikiLeaks depends on it. I certainly want WikiLeaks to exist in society. I do not want it to be possible for the US government to, as they tried, choke off the flow of money to those groups.
I mean, that's one thing we're going to look at is the Financial Action Task Force in Paris, the European Banking Authority, and also the Department of Defense in America are all looking at ways that Bitcoin is actually kind of a terrorist object, or something that they can use. How do you feel about that?
I think obviously terrorists will use it. And, you know, the benefits certainly outweigh the risks. And equally, obviously, terrorists will use the internet. Obviously, terrorists use freedom of speech. And we've accepted that that is a trade-off we must make.
But what do you think the Department of Defense will do? Is there anything that you see?
Well, what they do is a very interesting question. I mean, I think this, you know, from my point of view, I see, my role within Bitcoin certainly needs to include doing what I can to ensure that the technology defends against government actions trying to go and shut it down. Much the same way as the Tor developers, you know, defend that technology against governments trying to shut it down. Currently, it's mostly being China, where they've tried to go shut down Tor to go and keep dissidents from being able to go spread information. At some point, they'll break in the U.S. as well. And they work very hard to ensure that the technology enables that. And, you know, part of that's working on the technology itself, part of that's the political landscape surrounding it. Some of that involves both things simultaneously. And Bitcoin's no different.
I mean, how important is liberty to you?
Well, I mean, I think liberty has just been something we've accepted in Western-style democracies for hundreds of years. You know, that's why the system works. If you don't have liberty, even with the best intentions, governments eventually slide towards corruption and totalitarianism. And you must have liberty as an opposing force to that. You know, you may not have liberty to the extent that everyone can own their own nuclear weapons, or even everyone can own a gun is something that's very contested. But there's degree, and by having balance, especially with growth stuff like freedom of speech, you know, the system works better. And you know, it's interesting with Bitcoin how right now in the U.S., freedom of speech in terms of political donations has come up, and the Supreme Courts have very clearly ruled that money is speech. Well, from that point of view, Bitcoin is another way of preserving your freedom of speech by ensuring that you can go and give money to the causes you support.
I think what's interesting though about, for instance, the ISIS situation and liberty and the concepts of Western democracy is it's actually the technology is going to be aiding very repressive groups.
Yes. Part of Western democracy is acceptance that some part of the community may not have the same values as you. And you take the broader view of, if you set up a system where you can oppress that community, you've really turned your back on your own values. Because part of our values is the acceptance that the right to exist.
So if we came to the situation that, you know, ISIS get a nuclear weapon and they kind of attack America and this is all something that could have been funded by Bitcoin, for example, is that worth it if you could have stopped it?
Well, you know, again, you got to ask, well, what's the side effect of stopping it? Again, you can always say, all right, we're going to put a camera in every bathroom to go stop that. Yeah, we probably would stop it. But what's the consequences? And, you know, frankly, I mean, even taking such an extreme example, you know, ISIS hypothetically having a nuclear weapon paid for by Bitcoins. The fact of the matter is, we've seen the results of nuclear weapons. And you know what? Hiroshima and Nagasaki still exist, and Japan is a thriving democracy. Like, the very worst case, we have historical precedent, and we can understand that we can survive this and we can move on. Whereas countries that haven't been able to maintain their freedom, like Russia, well, look what's happening in Russia. You know, they never really were able to transition to a proper democracy. And, you know, from Canada, there certainly are a lot of Russian immigrants in Canada. You know, that really says something.
Well, I think I mean, for some people watching it, they would find it kind of extraordinary that you would say that, for example, the dark wallet was so important that you'd risk sort of your home country saying nuked or whatever. That was an idea that.
Well, freedom of speech is the same issue. I mean, heck, like, you know, my brother, he's actually going to be in Iraq in a couple of weeks. He's deploying off as part of his country's Air Force. And, you know, I've talked to him about all this stuff, and if anything, in some ways, he's even more extreme than my position, because, of course, he is in the military. And it's like ISIS, fuck, we're going to bomb the shit out of them. You know, what does ISIS have on us? Why are we worrying about this?
I guess from my perspective as a woman, just
Yeah.
with ISIS, I do worry because I do think any, like Taliban, you know, I do fear any kind of movement that is working to oppress women or doesn't recognize us as an equal
You know,
partner.
an interesting view on that, and I'm not really sure I agree with this view, but I think it's an interesting concept, is that our military power is funded by our freedom of speech, our democracy, our economy that actually works. And, you know, again, I don't quite necessarily agree with this, but even if, you know, you take those kind of views, well, ensuring that we still have functioning democracy gives us the legitimacy to go up against something like ISIS. And from that point of view, again, you still need the self-criticism, you still need all this freedom of speech to enable us to have that moral superiority.
I mean, I guess one thing people might say watching this is just in the discussion about liberty is you guys have, we talked about this yesterday, but you guys have such a kind of vaulted position where you have this incredibly interesting technology that you control, basically, and that you could...
We influence, we don't control it. People choose to use it.
Because people might say, well, you could choose to step in and monitor what's happening or what's
Well, the
happening.
interesting thing is, I mean, in some ways the cat's out of the bag. You know, once we write the software, we can't tell people. By the way, we prefer it if you used it in this way that happens to go break your own privacy. You know? I mean, I always see it as, literally, once the information's out there, people know how to use it. And the question is, well, what's the next step? And the next step for me is certainly, all right, let's go make it better.
Making it more secure.
Yeah. Because ultimately more secure means that the majority of people who are good guys, if you will, they benefit more than anyone else. And, you know, in the balance of things, we're better off if we have grassroots advocacy, for instance. How can you fund that? Well, Bitcoin's one good way. You know, keep the playing field level.
Are you ever tempted to use your kind of knowledge to wage any kind of political wars or no?
Well, dark world is, in a sense, waging. I mean, it's, you know, it's the constant battle of the moderate defenders of democracies saying, yes, we've got to go keep the system the way it is. And, you know, that's what's kind of interesting, but it's returning our environment back to the days when you could go and give someone cash. You know, we've got a lot of forces trying to completely outlaw cash. Well, what does that do? It means every single part of the economy can be monitored by governments. And we have ample evidence that is just too much power.
And I mean, I suppose I mean, it's not completely clear that why democracy requires even more kind of anonymity of something such.
Well, I think so. The cash thing is a good thing. Because with cash, currently we do have ways of moving money around fairly anonymously on a small scale. And in the future, it's easy to see that ability going away, which creates a less free environment for us to live in. You know, Bitcoin is one of many things pushing back against that and maintaining the status quo that we've lived in for hundreds of years. I'd much rather maintain the status quo that obviously works pretty well than to go and let society push further down this avenue of less freedom. In the exact same way as Tor maintains the ability of people to go and talk, to spread their speech. Again, that's something we've had, that's being clamped down on, and I'd much rather see that maintained.
And you're fine knowing that obviously people use the dark wallet or whatever might be involved in assassination plots, terrorism, drug deals.
Of course I am. You know, that's just part of society. I mean, we know how much harm those people do, and we know we can live with it because we've dealt with this. What we also know is that when you allow totalitarianism to happen, as you slide, you know, towards that, society does not have good ways of dealing with it. And very quickly, countries that make that mistake, well, they wind up having a lot of people leave and move to Canada. And, you know, I mean, it's like, I come from Toronto where, like, I think the number is like 60% of the population comes from outside Toronto. And a lot of those people that I've personally met have come from very, very repressive governments. What do those governments do? They maintain controls on movement of capital, maintain controls on movement of information.
I guess that's why the ISIS example is so pertinent for Bitcoin, because it's one thing, like Bitcoin is such an idealistic concept, and it's, you know, it's great, we're going to have liberty, we're going to have anonymity. But then for some group that's so repressive, pick up on that and say, yes, this is something that will help us. It has nothing to do with liberty.
Well, you know what's interesting is what countries are banning Bitcoin? It's not Western democracies, it's repressive places, because they themselves get undermined by these own tools. You know, ISIS, if they allow Bitcoin usage within the territory they control, what do you know? You can get the next group of revolutionaries making use of Bitcoin to go fight against ISIS itself. You know, it gives power to people with less power.
No, I don't know. It's still something that is quite jarring. I guess it's something that it's not in any way worrying, because for me it was like, oh God, now ISIS is going to use Bitcoin, great. Like, it's not something that surely foresaw.
Oh no, I think it's very obvious it would. I mean, same way ISIS goes and uses the internet, ISIS uses probably printing press, you know? I mean, it's just, of course they use these tools. The question is, structurally, what do these tools do? They have a tendency to go give power to people who don't already have power. You know, they're most useful, relatively speaking, to the people who you most want to be able to go and have power.
Except in this case, not.
No. In this case, relatively speaking, ISIS is better off if they do not have Bitcoin within their territory. Because that's irony. Of course, they can get money from outside, but within that territory, they're going to hold on to power longer if they can control the movement of cash, if they can control the economy, if they can control people's ability to speak, if they can control the internet. Sure, they may get a little stronger temporarily, but in the long run, they will be destroyed by that own technology.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. So they could use it in the short term to gain several millions of dollars, but then eventually the idea is that because of the freedom and it'll undermine.
You know, I love that actually Twitter, I think, is a really nice example of it. What does Twitter do? They go ban ISIS. Well, hang on a second. Wouldn't I rather have terrorists going and reading about Miley Cyrus on Twitter? Like, yeah, this is a tool for them to spread their message. This is also a tool for us to spread our message to them. You know, by kicking them out of that system, we're removing our avenue of influencing them in the same way that we've removed their avenue of influencing us. Well, between the two, which one has a better message? The better message is Western democracy. You know, the average person, yeah, that seems like a pretty good idea. And well, what you see with oppressive regimes, they always want to shut down the internet. It really says something.
Another question would be, where did ISIS get their funding from originally?
Yeah.
So could we talk about that as well?
If you want
But also, I wouldn't agree with you about the Bitcoin thing, because ISIS is a political organization, not a fiduciary state. Like for countries where the base of the power lies in finance, Bitcoin is a great tool for fighting the power. For a political country where it's different. It's not the same.
Yeah, but I mean, remember, in the long run, ISIS, if they're going to maintain relevance, they need to go have.
We will launder money, evade taxes, build uncensored drug markets, and there's nothing the government can do about it. We are in the G8 squad, which the G8 names dark wallet as a key money laundering tool.
We're all getting arrested.
Bitcoin is the resistance.
I think I hear the drums.
Your kind of intellectual ideas are very well thought out. But
Well, I mean, it's easy when you have the same ideas that people have had for hundreds of years.
But
I mean, I didn't come up with them.
But on that point, if for example, dark web starts to provide quite a stream of income for ISIS, you could very quickly find yourself on the wrong side of some quite
Oh, I'm sure we will.
some quite
But
interesting organizations.
then again, Tor goes and finds itself getting used for ISIS. Yeah, they have the same problem. I mean, I always find the people who go and are most against this, to me, always seem they don't seem very courageous. They don't seem like people are like, you know what, fuck those idiots. I don't care. You go look at like the propaganda from World War II of, we will stay strong, we will maintain our values. Yeah, there's propaganda, but there's a lot of truth to that too. Whereas you see 9/11, it's like, no, this really changes things. We gotta compromise. Well, yeah, where did that lead? A whole bunch of money down the drain. A whole bunch of corruption. I mean, the moment you start not knowing what's going on, well, yeah, what do you know? Turns out people are human beings.
Well, so earlier you asked about why the anonymity is important for speech. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to have free speech, you need anonymity because without anonymity, it can be like you can say whatever you want. Just tell me your name and address. It's important that people are able to speak without fear of reprisal.
If I want to give money to WikiLeaks, why do I want that showing up on my credit card statement for my employers to go and start asking questions about it?
In a free society, why should they ask questions about it?
Well, exactly.
Exactly.
But we do not live in a
So-
perfect free society. Therefore, we go and take precautions to ensure that the flaws of our society
If
don't
you work
cause
for yourself
problems.
in this society, you will ask questions.
One of the problems is focusing a lot on, what if a terrorist organisation uses, an instrument to transfer money, receive money anonymously, but we're missing the wider debate of financial privacy. You go and spend, buy a loaf of bread at Tesco's, you don't expect the checkout woman there to be able to look into your bank account and see how much money you're getting, and where you spend it. Maybe you have some embarrassing medical problem, you've got to buy stuff from the internet, you don't want that. The debate's much wider than what if a minority use this for some nefarious purpose.
I think it's great that terrorists are using Bitcoin. It shows that the tools we're building actually work.
Yeah.
Like we're building tools for people to resist power. So if the people fighting the power is using our tools, then obviously we're doing something right.
They're fighting the power, but they're also oppressing. I think that's the
Well, why
dichotomy.
don't you fund? Why don't you go fund
Yeah, but
the
who's
people that
ISIS
do?
funded by? It's funded
Yes.
by the USA.
Right.
Really, like all of
They
the
don't need our
ISIS
help.
comes from Western involvement in the Middle East.
It comes from taxpayers from those countries.
It was Taliban and Al Qaeda was funded by Pakistani proxies who gave money to Arab extremists when they were fighting the Soviets. The money was also given to Assad rebel forces who were fighting against Assad, who's an ally of Iran, but actually that was the origins of ISIS.
But when you see these people kind of getting beheaded, do you kind of seriously think, oh, it's great that they're using dark wallets?
But when you see cars that come...
Wait, how do we know they're using dark
How
wallets?
do we know they
No, we don't.
We-
Well,
We don't know that
they've
they're
suggested that
using
people
it.
do.
Yeah.
But they are
That's the
suggesting
idea,
that
I guess.
people-
When I see people getting beheaded, I'm thinking, well, it's great that we give money to Starbucks or we pay taxes that's used to actually create all of these problems. It's like dark wallet is really it's really just like a drop in the ocean in the grander scheme of things, you know, if you really want to see where the corruption or where any of these problems come, it doesn't come from technology that's meant to liberate people, you know, technology that we can use to freely associate mutually between us, you know.
Terrorists use phones too.
Sure.
And we
And
don't know that.
Twitter.
And the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why?
Maybe ISIS is a bad example, but maybe like an oppressive regime, say like China.
In fact, Bitcoin is great from Iran because Iranian citizens can use it to evade US sanctions.
But if
And
the government in
Iranian
Iran, like if you turn it around on the other side, and it's a government that's using Bitcoin to oppress people.
Well, if I found a victim of this oppression and I found a way to get them Bitcoin, would you fund it with Dark Wallet to help them resist?
If you found a victim
Somebody
of
was
oppression,
being oppressed by these oppressors to take Bitcoin so they can resist on the
but
ground
that's
locally.
we've said that already. That Iran it's useful. It's useful for people evading sanctions. But if you have the power to see in the blockchain transactions that are going to oppressive regimes or someone's, you know, there's a death camp or something.
We don't have the power.
You don't have the power.
You know, we deliberately engineer the things so that there is nobody who can have any kind of power over how the tools are used. It's up to the individual. We want to devolve power. We want to create the society where responsibility comes back into our hands. That's the only way that we're ever going to progress as a species. Because if we're always going to have to be trusting central bodies that arbitrate on our behalf, we're always going to be at the mercy of some different power group, whether it's ISIS or the United States or whoever. You know, and WikiLeaks as an organization, you know, they're very interested in Bitcoin, in how it can be used for publishing. You know, because there's this human intellectual record, and if you look, you see certain actors putting economic work into stopping things getting into that record, or even taking things out of the record, and really we've got to try and expand that record as much as possible. And when it gets into the realm of economic activity, you know, it's really in our benefit to try and enable all kinds of human economic activity to thrive and flourish. This idea of trying to manage how we associate or how we construct the things that we need to live is really a diseased mentality that is actually retarded human progress.
It's just something that may come up because I think when we looked at Ladar again with Lavabit and he was asked by the government to reveal his encryption keys, it's just something that people may think that you guys are capable of
Because
doing.
the difference between me and Ladar, Ladar runs a service.
Yeah.
Ladar runs a service where he has the servers and he operates it, and he's responsible for that. We create software, which is a form of speech, and you run the software on your computer, so you are actually operating that piece of software. But we give the instructions or the recipe for you to use that program, and we try to engineer ways that people in a peer-to-peer network can run the software independently between each other, so that they can collaborate together to perform some function, whether it's a drug market or different tools for laundering money or any financial thing, any financial instruments like securities, stocks, shares, options. Like for instance, being able to issue a stock is illegal unless you have these expensive licenses. So we have the crowdfunding, which is a way for people to gain investment into a project, but it's not the best way to do it. You know, actually, the better way to do it would be to issue a stock, but we can't do that because somebody in the financial system decided that, you know, you have to be heavily licensed and regulated to be able to have access to these financial instruments, and the only people who have access to them is the large mega corporations. You know, if I want to raise money for Dark Wallet or some other software project on the internet or whatever social cause I have, I'm shut out of having access to that. And now it's very telling, that the USA now is making the BitLicense, and the BitLicense says that You know, if you want to run a Bitcoin organization, you're going to need to have fingerprints with the FBI, background checks. You're going to need to keep 10 years of records of all the transactions with the name and address of both people on both ends of that. You're going to need written approval from the New York DFS. These are some overreaching regulations. So it's like, it's really telling like how much this old power structure feels threatened, that they feel the need to protect their interests, to protect how the things have always been done. You know, but now we are in this new stage where we have withdrawn our consent and we're saying, you know, this is how it's going to be, and you have no say in the matter. The future, all throughout history, you know, there were people who had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the future, and that's how it's going to be with Bitcoin. The things are changing, and that's that.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
You know, Jen, there are now like several systems where people can issue stocks and shares and have decentralized exchange and betting and all manner of things. You can do it right now.
Yeah.
And it's without jurisdiction.
I think what's interesting is people think it's difficult for Bitcoin because people think, oh, it's completely transparent, you can monitor the blockchain, and then I think there's a bit of a
Yeah, I want to hear you
Just for-
talk, because
just for our
yesterday you said it was
audience, yeah.
intellectually dishonest. Can you say right now, is there version 1 of Dark Wallet that allows full anonymity, not pseudonymity, not a chain of numbers, but
There's
full...
SX. You can use SX for anonymity. You have stealth addresses. You can
Right, but can we do that now?
own
Should we get it up on screen and show it?
Yeah, no,
Because I haven't yet seen it.
Dark Vault, we just added a new feature where it has a little anti-drone missile.
Right, because my point is at the moment you get pseudonymity, but only if you really, really careful with it. You've got to use Tor, you've got to use blockchain.info with that email address. There's processes.
No, but you can.
No, I know,
It works
absolutely.
well.
Absolutely, but what he
That-
said
that's
yesterday
what
was that it is absolute, that it's
And-
anonymity,
No,
Well,
not pseudonymity.
You can get good anonymity if you're careful, if you know how to use the tools, but it's tricky. But
Yeah.
the thing is to make it more usable
Right.
for more people to be able to have access to these tools.
Chris, you could
So it's
use a
like-
completely anonymous system like what Zero Cash claims to be, right? But send money to a place where you're registered with.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, as soon as you get in and out.
Kill it.
That's right. As soon as you get in and out of Bitcoin,
Like,
you start to get
if you have
exposed.
tools, you know, so you need the tools which enable anonymity if you follow best practices. Tor is another example. If you use Tor properly, assuming there aren't some weird zero-day bugs, you will be anonymous.
Even if there are weird zero-day bugs, you gotta take a couple more steps, and it's pretty unlikely for them to catch you.
However, if you do something stupid with Tor, then you're going to reveal your identity and location in the story. So it's not, you can't rely 100% on the tool. You know, you have to.
Yes.
Equally, you can make the same statement. People have this notion that the existing cash system is not anonymous, or sorry, the existing banking system is not anonymous. Well, what do you know in practice? When you throw some money at the problem, you hire some lawyers, you create some shell companies, you can go create something that gives enough barriers
Yes.
that a lot of investigations fail.
That's why I think it's a function of time and energy. So really what you're doing is trying to put up barriers between the tethering, the linking between you and your actions,
Yes,
your
it's all
identity
about how
and
much
your
money does it cost,
traceability.
or how much money the investigators have to go spend to analyze
Yeah.
you.
The
And both sides of it, it's easy to go get a heck of a lot of money you have to go spend to have any chance of finding out who you are. You know,
So
it's
here
just a
it
question of
sounds-
how much you pay up.
Sounds like you're saying we're reducing the cost of doing what people can already do.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And the key thing is the cost is not a linear function. The cost is sort of this weird thing where if I have $1 million, I can definitely hire lawyers and I'm good to go.
Yeah.
Currently, you know, if I'm trying to go send money with Visa or PayPal, I do not have that option.
It's not
You know,
entirely the same
we're
because-
changing that curve.
Right. You still have trust, like, you know, you hire lawyers, we have to trust them, right? You have to trust the system
Yes.
doesn't drag the information out.
But then I go hire a lawyer to go hire a
So
lawyer.
we should keep
Every step increases the probability of me getting away with it.
Right.
Well, we make that step number one, doesn't cost that much money, and makes it easy to go get away with it. And it tends to do a better job of that for small amounts of money anyway.
We're gonna-
There are practical problems with moving $100 million with Bitcoin. You know, in the same way that there are not practical problems with moving $100 million with fiat and staying anonymous. You know, kind of inverts this relationship that we currently have.
With dark wallet, you'll be able to move hundreds of millions of Bitcoin
How
dollars.
would you necessarily use it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, if you had, I gave you $100 million worth of Bitcoin, you wanted to actually use that. First of all, there isn't a large Bitcoin economy to spend directly with Bitcoins.
That's the thing.
So you'd have to convert that to fiat, and good luck with that.
Yeah.
I mean, just for for the FBI to, they stole all these Bitcoins from the Silk Road and sold them, on the open market. That 30,000 Bitcoin, it caused the markets to crash. Just the concept that there were going to be these extra 30,000 Bitcoins, there just isn't the liquidity. Bitcoin is a tiny drop in the ocean. Most multinational companies, have a larger kind of market cap than Bitcoin itself. It's
And
only
again,
7 billion or something now.
Let's assume Bitcoin becomes the point where you can go move $100 million that blink of an eye. Well, then we're back to where we all are already, which is a known problem.
Yeah.
We can deal with it. It's no big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
We can live with that. And we have solid evidence that we can.
And what's great about all of this is that we're talking about it, and Bitcoin made us talk about it, and dark wallet is now making us talk about it again.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting.
I mean, what we're really talking about is whether cash is legal anymore, right? I mean, is it legal to transact in cash? Because
Many
how
countries it isn't.
How much money do you actually spend on a given week in actual paper and coin? Very little compared to all your electronic transactions. So we have a digital, currency right now, which is completely not anonymous. Right? Where
Which
we
is the
used to
way
have a cash, people move gold around, right? It was completely anonymous if they wanted to be, and that was perfectly legal. It still is perfectly legal. So the question is, from a practical standpoint, are we willing to give up what was perfectly legal to transact anonymously in cash, which we did 100% of the time at one point, which we do maybe 5% of the time
And
now.
again, it's
We're
very
about to have
telling.
none.
If you had a lot of money, could you go and evade all this stuff? Sure. I mean, look at the fine arts market. Is it really
Yeah,
an enormous fine arts market?
You're
Because
right.
people really care about art.
Yeah.
I'm sorry they don't. No, they're trying to go move money around.
And you look at how capital controls are evaded in China. I think there's a limit of $50,000 that you can shift out of the country, and there are these stamps, some kind of like postage stamp, which are worth some inordinate amount of money, which people trade, as a way, because they can trade them in China, take them out of China, and sell them, and convert them into cash.
Well, even this building, like it's a tax evasion.
Well, yeah.
This building is a tax evasion itself.
Yeah, this is registered by a charity. It's a fake charity.
So it's kind of interesting because, as Amir says, this is leveling the playing field. When you look at the corruption that's going on, and the wrongdoing that's going on. I mean, the HSBC, has got away with funding, criminal gangs and drug lords, which have been responsible. Is it like 60,000 deaths or something in Mexico?
It just feels like a shame, I guess, that Bitcoin is going to be tainted with the same brush that.
No, I think it's alright.
You think it's okay?
Yeah, it's
I
alright.
can live with it.
Reappropriate the words, they're trying to.
Yeah, exactly. Reappropriate.
Jen,
Embrace.
when the conversations were starting about Bitcoin in the beginning, it was all Silk Road, drugs, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And this year, there hasn't been much of that at all. It's all been about big finance and because big businesses getting involved, PayPal's getting into it,
Yeah.
eBay's getting into it,
It just feels like it's becoming just the same as everything. It's
Well,
just-
exactly. But now there's this sort of ISIS things come out of apparently nowhere, although we forget it's our governments who actually have been funding them in Syria, and it's just now they're not something we like
Yeah.
because they've spilled.
And it was our money that they used. It was taxpayers' money.
Let me tell you who's the rebels. Yeah, when they're in Syria, they're the good guys.
Right.
When they're in Iraq, they're the bad guys.
That's right. That's exactly it. There's a picture who's been tweeted around still to this day of started a month ago of God, who is it? John McCain or something?
And Clinton, and Hillary
Hanging out with
Clinton.
Abu Mosa. Yeah.
Shaking hands with one of the heads of ISIS.
You know,
in
Vice
Syria.
did that documentary,
Yeah.
and they've got all the like PR videos with that guy Abu Mosa.
Yes, right.
There's like there's like pictures of him with like being all chummy with John McCain.
Because when in Syria, then these guys are the good guys because they give them weapons and they can fight,
The enemy of
the United States. But
yeah.
when those people then go into because the problem is what America's doing is funding an organisation who has its own ideologies. It's not a department, of the United States Army, right? So the problem is that in funding those people, then they get, like more empowered to follow their own ideals, which, had things like invading other countries like Iraq.
Meanwhile, what did the Silk Road do? Well, it led to a lot of non-violent neckbeards sitting in their basement who sell drugs. I'm not exactly that concerned about that.
And it took the violence out of the transactions.
Yeah, in fact, not only that, you could
Also gave access to a
not
lot of drugs
endorsing
to a lot of
drug taking
people.
or selling, right? But
Different
the difference
psychedelics.
between going, buying drugs physically, it's very dangerous. You can be robbed, etc., etc. Also the quality, there's no way to sort of, if you're selling me something that's cut, I can't really come back and complain because you're a drug dealer and you've got lots of guns, right, or friends with guns. But on the Silk Road, you have this reputation system, so people have to deliver, and they have to deliver quality. It's kind of ironic,
Yeah.
and that ends up being safer because at least people, when they, are buying whatever drug it is, are getting the drug they buy.
Which is benign, but then you have things like child pornography as the age-old.
I think
Like Jimmy Savile.
And what's fascinating
Jimmy Savile. Yeah. And the
tell
people
your
in
dudes at the BBC.
Sorry.
Child pornography and Bitcoin.
Wasn't this the primary knowledge of the internet itself?
What's fascinating about this stuff is, well,
That's
all
like-
right,
that's like a
when is money involved?
Yeah.
Well, money ends up being involved when there exist people who, for economic reasons, are in bad situations. I mean, especially like, I've got a friend of mine who's a pediatric psychiatric nurse. She spends a lot of time, especially with troubled teenagers. Well, when do they get involved with prostitution? Well, when they don't have a place to stay. When do they get involved, letting people take photos of them? When they don't, have a family to go back to. How do you stop this stuff? Well, you could go spend a ton of money trying to enforce one side of it. Or as it turns out, it's actually really cheap to maybe send some money to group homes and actually fund the problem. We have very effective ways of fighting this stuff.
But
And equally, we've dealt with the problem for a very long time, and we know it does not threaten the bedrock of society. It's very unfortunate. But
Peter, do you remember when earlier commercial internet days, the only thing people talked about was that the internet was, den of pornographers.
yeah,
That was it.
Yeah.
The only thing people wanted to talk
Yeah.
about, right? We're going to
Yeah.
regulate this, that, and the other thing about the internet. We don't talk about that anymore, right? It's this amazing technological, innovation that has saved the world. from
Not
itself.
only that, right? I mean, you've got mainstream programs on TV extolling the latest internet app. It's considered such an important thing for society. We now have governments allocating billions of dollars in cyber defense.
Yeah.
I mean,
But the only thing people talked about in the early commercial days of the internet were the pornographers and the criminals and the money launderers.
I think
Just like we see in Bitcoin today.
It's undeniable, the Silk Road gave people a lot of drugs,
Yep.
and it's like giving people more access to more and more drugs. And I think it's really interesting because as a model of how a marketplace could work with the people anonymous and all the different tools used for people to be able to find buyers, be able to transact with people over the internet, that give an image for how we can build not only online shops, but various forms of marketplaces for all different kinds of purposes. Because I work with the cooperatives in Europe, and all the different tools that we can use to empower local producers and bring back the trade to group, because our consumption is separated from the production, and there's all these hidden costs, things like the soil being degraded or the health, like all the chemicals that are put into our food. But when the things are more locally connected, there's more. It enables not only are we getting products that are better and we can see the real cost of our consumption, but also it's like the money goes back into your local area, it goes into your friends, as opposed to flowing to the monolith, to the top of the triangle.
a really interesting point about Silk Road. Everyone focuses on the fact you can buy drugs there and other stuff, but they forget people were selling Bibles on the Silk Road too. Because in Korea,
Oh, right.
they're not allowed to buy
China.
something buy Bibles, right? And that was a huge market. It wasn't even niche, it was huge. You know? So, you know, we talk about, you know, Tor is another thing that is attacked a lot, but you forget it's the government that actually, you know, the US government made this, you know, exactly.
And they're still funding it.
Also,
You know?
you say about the child porn as well. And the thing is that these things, like if you see like 4chan, where it's everyone's anonymous and uncensored, and you see Nazis and anarchists and child porn and all different kinds of, this is a reflection of the society that is, you know. So that's maybe you can stop.
Equally, why don't we start
or
like
cover it up.
child porn, digital cameras? Why aren't we regulating digital cameras? Well, obviously we don't do this because the benefits outweigh the risks. It's just such an obvious thing.
We just have to be honest about
You know?
that.
Same
We
for
have
video
to accept
cameras.
those risks.
Yeah. You know?
People
And I'll bet you,
find themselves.
you could probably go find some people arguing back in the early days, video cameras, yeah, we gotta regulate this because this, and this. Of course, fortunately, we rejected that, and now that we've, you know, dealt with the problem for 20 years, actually, you know what, it didn't turn that bad. Society moved on.
There was a
But
very
if you
interesting thing.
censor child porn, you're not going to stop child abuse.
Yeah.
That's the point.
You know, the most telling thing actually for me was during the Senate hearings last year. You know, the head of FinCEN stood up and testified that they didn't need any new laws to regulate Bitcoin, to deal with criminals, you know, drug dealers, terrorists, you know, you name it. They didn't need any more laws because they had sufficient tools already to find and prosecute criminals who use Bitcoin. You know? So therefore, we can tell that it maybe isn't such a problem. It's just a different way of transferring money, but maybe they've got enough, you know, investigative and regulative power.
You know, the system doesn't work when you try to drive things to zero anyway. You just have to accept that, you know, you're going to end up with some kind of wrongdoing happening, and life goes on.
Total information freedom.
Yeah.
Isn't that the essential
No
trade-off?
compromise.
It's
No
the essential
compromise.
trade-off of freedom, right, of liberty, it's, right, you accept the bad with the good. You know, I would, you and I would differ on this, like, question of utility versus, you know, natural rights, because you said, like, it's a cost benefits thing, right? Why do we let people have cell phones? Because there's benefits, and I would say, no, absolutely not. We let people have cell phones because we don't have the power to take away their right to do whatever they want to do, as long as they don't hurt somebody else, right? So, fundamentally, the question is, do you want to live in a free society, right? Do you want a free speech, or do you want to make everybody say the right things, right?
When the fax machine came about, then I mean, that was another thing. People were being prosecuted for mail fraud, you know, for sending a fax, because, you know, there was a monopoly on. I mean, it's just every time a new technology comes, there's this sort of pushback.
There's a moral panic every time new technology comes. People say, oh no, this is going to, you know, cause these terrible things, you know, pornography, terrorism.
There was
It's not the case.
it was punishable by death, right, to use the printing press. That's how far it went. In the beginning, it was like, you know, they regulated it, you know, and had more and more stiff fines until it was punishable by death.
Printing press is a great example.
Yeah, I remember there's like this law that he was saying, oh, because people used to go and get their news from the pulpit, and he was saying, like, oh, the common man will be able to, like, read books to be terrible.
People read the Bible.
Like,
that was the issue.
yeah, the Bible as well. Yeah.
You can't just tell them this is
Yeah,
what God
you
tells
can't
us
tell
to
them
do.
that it says it here.
I'm gonna go check this, mate. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm gonna go check this.
That's
Good
what
challenge.
it was like.
You can't tell them indulgences are in the Bible anymore when they read it and it turns out that they're not, right? That was really the main issue.
Then we have a whole big discussion. That's what I'm waiting to find out.
This is an interesting thing. Let's suppose, hypothetically, that uranium, enriched uranium was everywhere. It was really easy to go dig it out of the ground. Of course, given, you know, the cost benefit, I think we pretty quickly go figure out the cost of giving people access to technology. They want to go nuclear weapons with a couple explosives. And we probably would have to say, yeah, unfortunately for this, we're going to have to change the whole lot. You know, and all this stuff, it's just returning what we already have. We know the cost of that. We know we can live with it.
It'll be very interesting to see what we edit out of this.
Saturday. Do you guys have television here? You must have iSex.
We pay our license fee too.
Yeah, well.
Don't we, Arthur?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that license fee, yeah.
Yeah, you pay it.
TV license.
Oh yeah, that's that British thing right there, like
The British thing.
the TV cops that like make sure you're not watching without a
Yeah,
license.
we used to close the windows and answer the door like when they came.
Yeah, they would like drive around with a Snoopy van and try to.
Yeah, they would like knock our doors and we'd just like ignore them.
I was reading about that just a little while ago. It's so funny.
Yeah, it's from my childhood. You know, we used to get these vans and like looking out the window like shit, close the door.
TV cops.
Yeah.
They
Well, they like detect using the television to switch off the TV. And
But doesn't that pay the BBC budget?
Yeah.
No, BBC Worldwide can afford to pay.
No, they're a big part of their budget comes from the television tax.
It's Jeremy Clarkson.
Jeremy Clarkson.
No, but you know how much money that man has made up of just licensing Top Gear to other countries?
Is it the
Just
BBC
make
that
money.
plays, what's that guy with the long hair? He's like, I'm a revolutionary.
Oh, him, yeah.
Who's that?
Russell Brand.
No.
He's got his own YouTube channel now, where he makes fun of the
Which
fact.
channel was funding him? Is it Channel 4?
Well, he was on Radio 2. He was on Radio 2 and he got fired for that thing.
That was a while ago.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
Is that the last time that you watched any BBC?
No. I haven't watched TV for years since I was like a teenager.
Yeah.
I have the internet. It's way better. I can download all the movies, all the music, YouTube. It's like TV just like wastes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Like you get a lot more shit done if you like.
Not that, only that, it's being used as a weapon against people. Like the iFlicker raids, the programming, the bad programming from the BBC. It's like you can't deny it's being used as a weapon against every
It's
single
like a
person.
firmware, it's like a
that
human
sits
firmware
in
upgrade.
there.
You're basically downloading your firmware when you're watching.
Now we're going to use you against you.
Well, that wouldn't be the first, would it?
That's what you do now. Witnesses against ourselves.
As long as you haven't got another Jimmy Savile in there. There's Jimmy Savile too.
Are you gonna make your way over to the conversation?
Yeah.
I watch Hard Talk, like it's my show on YouTube or something, like his stuff.
Say hi to talk to Paul.
Peter Todd and everyone's here.
Yeah, he's got a booth at the place. They're doing their release.
Is that Paul? Is William there?
No, Paul and his the girl that does our marketing. He sponsors this thing. He's got a booth there where they're showing people their stuff, so he can't really throw in the show.
Yeah. Maybe after.
Oh yeah. He's given up now. It's unfortunate.
Well, but he can't resist it. He likes throwing up.
This is cool. They say what they're gonna do with it.
Yeah, he's funny.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I've always had faith in the BBC will like
They'll cut it up and put on some
Yeah,
music.
there's certain parts of it.
Yeah.
It's
It's
gonna
good recording.
be Simon who's like those things he starts to kind of the editor. Yeah.
Oh, you did the editor, man. You did the show on the Switcher.
That's
really cool. I like people like that. I like people.
The whole team is like,
Get involved.
yeah.
I was really impressed to hear that Spencer does the
Spencer's graphics, I was saying, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see him on the tube sometimes.
Really?
He's on the red line.
Oh,
Yeah, I really like
yeah, I
that.
liked it.
It's great.
Yeah. One day I walked to work and like everyone was high-fiving Spencer in the street.
Yeah,
I was
it's
like,
cool. You've got like 8 million followers on Twitter. It's amazing.
a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I can put some dark colour stuff on there.
Yeah, we're gonna like take some of the graphics and
totally
yeah.
Microsoft questions.
G8 released a document mentioning Clark Wallet as a key money laundering threat.
Yeah, but you brought that up on my show, yeah.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that ISIS, it doesn't mean that ISIS is actually taking over.
It's like two pieces of documents. There's an ISIS document that ISIS.
Everyone's about to go critical.
We're praying for the release of the dark wallet.
I need to stop working.
Want to start using this software.
Yeah, they wouldn't, no, they wouldn't. They wouldn't like it when their population started using it. Then
Really,
they'd hate
I'm
it.
not so sure about that because we have a tendency to like see the different political situation through the lens of how things are here. The thing is to realise is that, as I was saying earlier, it's the base of their power is not from their finance, it's from politics.
It's ideology.
Yeah, from ideology, they censor the people, they use repression.
So do you think that an
That's
organisation
why
that censor people would like them using dark wallet?
Yeah.
I think for them it
People
doesn't
are
matter,
ideologically driven in
it's
that
not the base of their power doesn't draw from
Money.
from their money, it draws from the violence,
That's a good
from
point.
the aggression. So I'm not going to use
So
I'm
they
going to say
would
yeah.
like to have resistance locally on the ground that are able to do something about it.
Yeah.
Dark
But
wallet.
they're driven, I mean, they won't be able to be damaged because
try and
they
use
have
it
hidden
for
tunnels and wrap them and they can hide and they've got
Well,
driven
when I
ideology, they don't need
safely,
Like China's an interesting one.
That's
because
horrifying
like,
stuff is generally not
it's still a political
Yeah, you gotta be
society, but it's
But
also now
the ZM, so the
also
ZMQ
moving
protocol
to this kind of like
proxy support.
financial
But
kind of thing, whereas a country like Iran is still very much political. Actually, Iran is also interesting.
I wasn't going to do it. You know.
They,
But, so he
they
said
were
that to,
censoring
this guy
payments on
Martin,
the internet.
and they just, I think they're just about
A
done
real
with it.
threat
So
for
we'll
them,
have,
for their economies
yeah,
from
we'll have
outside.
at the
The
ZMQ
real
as well,
doubled
we'll
from
have
12,000
and
per US dollar to 25,000 in 1 year. So a massive rate of brain drain, one of the highest in the world.
Yeah.
And,
Really a little bit too much to ask.
Yeah, Argentina's actually quite
Star
threatened.
Tour
They've been in
and
contact with
properly-
Yeah, I'm going to go to
Prone
Argentina.
for browser
Yeah, and also
which means, you know, no matter
also
what you do,
Ecuador is
you're
very
just not
interested in
about
Bitcoin.
you spend
They're making their own thing, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, in Scotland, you've got a great opportunity.
Yeah, Bitcoin the national
Bitcoin
currency.
is
I have a contact with like Raphael Correa. But the thing is, I'm like really not sure about this guy. Like, what is he?
I'm
I read some things.
Yeah.
And
So I
it
have to pour it
seems
in, fill in the hole,
like
so I can.
maybe okay, but other things I'm not so